All the things that people claim to hate is what they actually want to watch. And then the other thing is that I'm like, I have my community here. I have my friends here. And I feel safe here because I feel like I know what the threat is.
Welcome to What Came After. I'm your host, Manya Marcus. On What Came After, we'll take a look at the many ways that people's lives changed on and after the brutal massacre in Israel on October 7th, 2023. We'll be speaking with people in Israel and around the world about how the devastating attack by Hamas has shifted, shaped, and changed them. To learn more about our podcast, please visit us at whatcameafter.com. I'm excited to welcome my guest today, Aleeza Chanowitz. Aleeza is the creator, writer, and lead actor of Chanshi, a comedy drama produced by Kastina Productions and released on Israel's Hot network. Brooklyn-born and raised, Aleeza moved to Israel in 2011 and attended the Sam Spiegel Film School in Jerusalem. Aleeza is currently in development with Kastina Productions on her second series, Big Crater, which was featured in the Sam Spiegel Series Lab. Aleeza is also working on a limited series adaptation of Zeruya Shalev's best-selling novel, Love Life, for Hot. Aleeza asked that I mention that she currently lives in Tel Aviv with her extremely handsome Israeli husband and their gorgeous daughter. Today's episode comes with a content warning since it contains a discussion of sexual violence. Aleeza.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Sure. Thank you. Right? That's what I'm supposed to say.
Absolutely. You can.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm delighted to be here. The thing that I want to talk about first, which is related, I think, to October 7th, is that I wanted to watch your show, Chanshi, before I met you. And I couldn't figure out how.
Yes.
That's an October 7th story for me.
Is it?
Yes, I'll say why, and then I will hand it all over to you. This is a show that should be on HBO and or Netflix and or Apple TV. It's powerful. It's beautifully produced. It's raunchy. It's tragic. It's vivid. It has an audience. And the fact that it was so difficult for me to find it, and eventually you had to send me a secret link with a password.
Don't tell everyone. But the reporter,
delete.
The reporter's link, yeah.
Then I think it means that something went wrong politically and artistically. And I imagine that that has to do with the war. So if you could jump in and just talk about the journey of making it, releasing it, when that was, and then how it's been to find a home or not in the wake of the war, that would be great.
I'm going to try to give the short version of how it happened. I went to film school here because I just didn't know what else to do with my life. I made Aliyah when I was 21. I moved here. And then I went to film school because I liked watching Israeli movies. And then I was like, who knows? Maybe I'll like making them. I'd studied for a semester at Brooklyn College. I studied film for a semester. And I just felt out of place there because everybody knew, they knew all of the cinematographers and all the directors and all the actors. And I was just like, well, I saw Nightmare Before Christmas. That was I didn't have all these references. So I thought I was out of place. And then we made actual films. I made a 3-minute actual film, with film. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, with real film.
With real film. And it was so expensive. And I think I spent around $80 or something on it. But people were spending $400 on their films. And they were like, of course I would do that. And I was like, what a waste of money. I just want to buy sandwiches. So I was like, this is not for me. I ended up studying Judaic studies. But anyways, I moved here and then it was just well, what did I just do? I don't know anything about living on my own or doing things. And I ended up going to Sam Spiegel Film School in Jerusalem because I was living in Jerusalem. I didn't know it was hard to get into until I had gotten in. I think my ignorance helped me through the tests. I didn't know what I thought they expected me to answer, so I just had fun with it. So when I was there, he's no longer the head of the school, but Renan Shore was the head of the school when I was going there. His whole thing was, Ma pesa shalach, what is your wound? That's where you need to tell your story. Only you can tell this story. What's your issue? What's your trauma? He didn't say, what's your trauma? Because now it's very popular for people to use the word trauma, but he talked about a wound. When I was there, I ended up doing 3 short films. 2 of them had success. And I acted in all 3 of them. just because it was fun for me. And I ended up doing things that had to do with the Ola experience.
Ola means new immigrant.
A new immigrant to Israel experience. Also as an American and also as someone who comes from a religious home and is just kind of not sure what to do in terms of religiosity and like where I feel about that. And there was always sex involved, which is like part of figuring out who you are. So I had all those elements and it was in all three of them. That's how I was able to get the development at Hot, which is one of the 4 or 5 broadcasters that we have in Israel. And they're a private company, so you have a little more freedom then. When you go to film school, you come out saying, I want to make films. And this is like 2017, 7 years ago. So at that point, TV wasn't the same place it is now. Now TV is cinematic. Then people didn't want to do TV. And it was just changing as I started to work on the show. But it was funny because she was like, do you want to do a show? And I didn't want to, but I realized it was an opportunity for a job and I didn't have a job because I had just finished school. And I was like, yes, I really want to do this as a series and I have so many ideas. And I just lied my way through it. And I remember my mother-in-law telling me, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. She was like, you did 3 short films. Just think about like you're doing 10 short films. And I was like, oh, I can do that. So when it came out, I also had just given birth.
So when did it come out?
In December 2022. The first few episodes came out and they didn't do a binge. They I think we're putting out 2 episodes a week. It got great reviews. There was like one bad review and that person who gave the bad review was interviewed on a podcast by someone who gave a positive review. And they ended up being like, well, I'm going to watch the rest of the show because I want to see what happens with this character. So I was like, oh, got all positive reviews. So it had some success in the film world. The kind of content that Americans want to buy, like original Israeli content, is anything that's kind of like fauda stuff, like action, Arabs, Israelis, all the things that people claim to hate is what they actually want to watch. So a show like mine is character driven, and that's not the kind of original content they would want to buy.
I want to say that when I did a little research, I mean, it went to Sundance.
Yeah.
Right? It did circulate a little bit among the festivals that people have heard of.
Yeah.
And it did well.
I guess it did well. I got feedback from people like after October 7th, I was supposed to go to Sweden for a festival in Stockholm. The week I was supposed to leave, I hadn't received my ticket. And sometimes in film festivals, they buy something last minute. So I contacted them. They didn't answer. So then I contacted the head of the festival and I was like, I haven't received my ticket and no one's responding. And then I got this bullshit response. I can't even remember all the details, but basically something like, oh, it's dangerous. I don't know what it was. The embassy, some bullshit about why they couldn't bring me in.
That it would be dangerous for you to be in their country.
They didn't say that. They said something about like people coming from this area and we don't want you to get stuck here. Something like that. I was like, this is bullshit, So I responded, okay, if I get stuck in Stockholm, it'll be my responsibility. Like, I'll deal with it. And then she sent me some other excuse about why I couldn't come. I wish they would have said, we don't want to support anybody from Israel. Like, I would have just known. Or I wish they would have been like, we can't protect your safety and we don't have security for you, which is their responsibility. But like, obviously, if I was Palestinian, they would have gone out of their way to bring me and make me feel safe. That's how I felt. And then it leaked to the media. I ended up doing a Zoom with the leaders of the festivals. They put the blame on the person who wrote it, said that she had bad English, and they understood why I could interpret it the way I interpret it. Take whatever you want from this thing. It was pure anti-Semitism in my head. Like, I don't think that would have been the same thing if I was from anywhere else in the world. If I was coming from Russia, if I was coming from Ukraine, they wouldn't have this kind of a thing. If I was coming from Yemen, you know what I mean? Like they wouldn't care. Look, it's hard for me to look at the show and say, how did people perceive it before or after October 7th? They have told me that they look at it differently, but you've watched it after October 7th.
Yeah,
so
I watched it only recently. I actually heard about it also after October 7th, but a while ago. And was desperately trying to find a way to watch it. It sounded like it would have some overlap stylistically with 2 of my favorite shows, Girls, at least the first 2 seasons or so. And I don't know if you've ever seen the show Tell Me You Love Me on HBO.
No, but I think I've seen the first season of Girls, and then I didn't have HBO. So
to me, there are some overlaps in content and style. And because I liked those shows, I really wanted to see yours. But I never would have brought a pre-October 7th consciousness to it.
Well, what did you think?
I really enjoyed it. I pretended as though I watched 10 episodes in 23 hours because I had to prepare for this interview, but I watched 10 episodes in 23 hours because I was gripped and desperate to see what happened next. And I think at the end of it, that I felt that it was a show about trauma and how trauma changes people. Trauma can spin people in many directions. Some of them are not so dark. Some of them are quite light. But there's generally an underbelly, and your show explores that a lot. I'm in a difficult position right now because I don't want to spoil the plots of the show. And yet I know that primarily the people who will be listening to this, hopefully they'll have access to it by the time it comes out, but it's not so likely. Really?
I don't mind doing spoilers. Like, I think it's fine to like talk about the show because I think it makes the conversation at least more interesting if we can talk about like where it actually goes. And hopefully people will think it's interesting enough that they'll go and watch it even if they feel like they know how it ends. Because I think it's the actual just like experience of the show. I wanted it to be something that was fun and entertaining. And it obviously touches on real issues.
I read some of the reviews. I read some of the articles that came out from the international press before October 7th, of course. And there was a lot of emphasis, even among Jewish publications that were looking at it, at its raunchiness, its humor, its levity. And I thought maybe they only watched the first few episodes because I thought that missed the ultimate point. It becomes heavy.
Yeah.
It becomes about a woman/girl who's engaged to a boy in New York. He's actually a very nice character in many ways. And she comes to Israel under the ruse of being there for a friend who was once a good friend, but it turns out they have not been in touch for quite some time. And she upends everything. Everywhere she goes, she is, at least in the initial scenes, tone deaf, selfish. I hope that's okay to say.
Yeah.
She has her own agenda.
She comes off very unlikable, I think, in the first episode,
Very
which was a risk.
So. Oh, but I wanted to hang on. It was so wild. Her need to meet her own needs was so deep. And what's so difficult, I think, in terms of imagining people watching it now who are critical of Israel, is that from the first scene, we are encountering Israeli soldiers and the Israeli military and how that represents such fierce sexuality, both because these people can be protectors and because these people have great capacity to harm.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Is that right? You sort of learn that.
Yeah.
Sexually, this character Chanshi entices them in both directions.
Yeah.
The source of the attraction is, oh, protect me. And then it becomes, oh, please hurt me, in some of those scenes throughout the show. And she's,
the first episode.
The first episode. And she's a fetishist.
Yeah.
It's clear she's working through something. She has a fetish about men in the military. She also has a fetish as an Ashkenazi Jew about non-Ashkenazi Mizrahi Jews. It's quite objectifying in a lot of ways. And I think for me, at least as a therapist, as I'm watching it, I'm realizing that something in her is playing out the trauma of having been objectified. And I don't know if we're going to see it. And then we do.
Which was satisfying.
But for me, which was satisfying. But
could not be.
No, which for me was very difficult and also very satisfying. And it felt like that's where the intelligence of the show was.
Well, thanks. Make me feel so smart. One of the things that I heard from 3 people who had kind of like criticism, I guess, about the show, they were upset that they thought at the beginning, oh, this is a show about a girl who enjoys sex and who goes for it. And then in the end, it's like, oh, it's because she was sexually traumatized. And then they were upset by it. And I was like, but it's not one or the other. Why are you looking at it so narrow? Like, I was basing this on some of my own feelings where it's like, yeah, you like really want this sexual experience. You really want to have a good time, but it's not black and white. I felt like they just didn't understand. I was like, the whole thing is this gray area. Sexuality is never black and white. One of the challenges in finding a director, I didn't want to direct because I didn't want to wear like all the hats and I like working with other people. The directors I ended up choosing were Mickey Trieste and Aaron Gevo, who I actually knew from film school. They directed a short film, but this is the first time they did a series.
They did a phenomenal job.
They did a great job. And whatever they lack in experience, they make up for in their dedication. But also the humor was important to them. And they understood that the humor was also talking about deeper issues. Just to give you some background, in the first episode, at the end, she finds this Israeli soldier and she has sex with him at the end of the first episode. I don't know how you would describe this in terms of like your psychology terms of like how she asks him to have sex with her as if she's being raped. And the whole thing is very confusing. And so that was what I wanted. I wanted this complexity and this kind of confusion. You know, the soldier also is uncomfortable about being put in this position. So everyone's kind of in this like weird situation and they go through it. You know what I mean? We have issues with men and women and equality in the world. But when it comes to the bedroom, things are more complex. When it comes to talking about rape, that it's like hard for me to say like, Chanshi was raped, which was based on my own experience. Like I was raped. It's hard for me to say that because in my head, the word rape, it's so clear that there's a bad guy and a victim. And, you know, there was violence and it was clear that one person did a bad thing to someone else. And I don't think what he did was okay. I do think he took advantage of me and the situation. But it was just a lot more complex than that. Like, and so it's like you have all these mixed, you know, feelings about what happened. And then it feels like the way people are talking about it, you know, on TV or whatever is like, these men are bad men. And I'm just like, could we have a conversation about it? Because I don't want to put this guy in jail. I really want to understand my experience and then see where I go from there or see how it affected me later on. And I moved on from there. It has affected me and I see the way it's affected my life, but now I sound like I'm preaching.
Well, no, you don't sound like you're preaching. Clearly, you are more reflective about what that experience has meant for you than Chanshi is able to be. Yeah. And of course, she is less distant in time from the experience. Yeah. There is a moment where a man that she's seeing to whom she does this same thing. Yeah. The sexual violence is not only male to female. The sexual violence actually most portrayed in the show is female to male. And I don't think that's portrayed very often actually in any media. So, essentially what's happening in the bedroom is that it's very clear that he's enjoying what's going on, but he's saying no to sex for religious reasons. This is this boundary for him. Right. But she sees that he's aroused. And in her mind, well, that's your body talking over your ability to speak for yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's essentially what happens, at least in the show, in terms of this initial rape scene that she's referencing, where she's clearly enjoying what's happening between her and the first person, Oz, who is the person in her mind, this is who she lost her virginity to. In my mind, I don't know that I would frame it quite that way, right? But I'll go with the logic of this show. The person that she loses her virginity to is interpreting her pleasure correctly, but not listening to what's coming out of her mouth. Yeah. And that then happens from Chanshi's character to a male character that I think they have a real emotional connection. And I think the show is specifically apolitical. It's not saying, men are bad, women are victims, or women are empowered and men are, whatever. There's no sense of agenda in the show, and that makes it very interesting for me to watch in the wake of the war, because I feel like everything that has to do with Israel has to be seen right now through the agenda of either explaining, defending, maligning, critiquing. And the fact that that's not in this show, it's something that I paid attention to with a different consciousness because of the era that we're in.
After October 7th, months in advance, I had planned to go to the U.S. to do some speaking engagements at Brandeis and at NYU for students who would watch the show, and then I came in to discuss it with them. And originally, I was going to go on my own, have a week without the baby, make some money, and come back. But obviously, October 7th happened, and obviously nobody knew what was going to be with our lives. But I was like, this might be my last opportunity to make some money. I got to go. And I took the baby with me, and she was about 8 months at the time. So one of the class meetings that I had at NYU, it was an Israel studies class. And there was one girl there who was sitting separate from all the students. And I didn't understand why. And then as the class was going on, I kind of understood why. The professor played a scene, I think, from episode 2, where Chanshi is walking in the Nachlaot neighborhood. And she's saying this line about we got to go after our men. We have to, we got to go after what we want. This place was a desert when we got here, but look at it now. Like they didn't give up and they went for it. There's this whole other scene that happens, but then this girl's just like raised her hand. She's like, I have a comment. I don't know if I should say it. And in my head, I'm like, well, then don't say it. But then she was like, she said that it was a desert before they got here, but it wasn't a desert. There were people there and they died in the Nakba and all that stuff. And I ended up answering her question with talking about like the world of the character. First of all, you clearly didn't watch all the episodes, which you were handed. Like, she does mention something about the Nakba. And this is something where it's like, this is character driven. This is an opportunity for somebody who wants to say like, who is this person? And like, there are people like this and what is their perspective? And like, she's not a malicious person. She's not out to hurt anyone. She's very much in her own world and it's more of a psychological journey. But the second she heard that, and I understand why someone would say like, oh, these are people who don't respect us. But I'm like, there's also, a certain lack of awareness that some people have about the history that happened. And now it feels like there's just a new narrative. So it's like really complicated to like have that conversation. So I obviously wasn't going to go into her with about like, well, watch 7. They mentioned Nakba. In what way? In a way that she has no idea. I ended up answering her question. And then when I left the building, people were running out wearing all these signs, anti-Semitic things. I was with my baby and I was with my mom and I'm like, let's get out of here. And we just ran to the subways, which brings me to another point. I'm like, if I were to try to make this show in the US, forget about like how you even get your foot in the door. The actual content of the show, if it were to be made in the US, I wouldn't have been able to make jokes about how she's into a guy because he's Mizrahi.
Jews of Middle Eastern descent.
Like, I wouldn't be able to make those kind of jokes. Clearly, I'm coming at it with humor, and I did it in a way that I didn't think was offensive.
But it also happens from the perspective of the character. This is not an entirely sophisticated person.
Right.
She's completely absorbed within herself, it turns out, because she's working through trauma. But you can't ask a character who's completely self-focused to bring political awareness to her humor.
Not only that, but think of watching a show like that. That's why I think a lot of these shows that you feel like there's the Indian guy, there's the Black woman, there's the Asian child. Like, oh, great, they've got one of each. Now they can do the show. A lot of times it's like, it feels forced. Like I heard somebody saying like they wanted to put this Indian woman in this role. They're like, oh, but you can't have an Indian woman playing, like they can't have them being a villain. And it was like, well, maybe the actor wants to do that role. And that's what I think about my show. I'm like, I wouldn't have been able to do it. It wouldn't have had the same kind of effect. It wouldn't have been as personal. I would have had to go and explain everything. When you watch a show that it's not a full experience and you don't actually feel like it's a real character, I feel like that's boring. I feel that now from the meetings that I had with people who are working in the US, since October 7th, a rift happened in Hollywood. A lot of them realized that the shows that I guess like they call it like woke weren't doing well. And then I think back to how the original content that they want to purchase from Israel is stuff that has to do with Arabs versus Israelis, action, army, guns and violent shit. That's what they want to buy because that's what people want to watch. They're businesses. What do people want to watch? They want to watch that stuff. And I don't have social media. It's hard for me to know where things really stand. I hear a lot of things from other people telling me, like, this is how everyone feels. And I'm like, I don't know how everyone really feels.
Right. Even if you're on social media, you can't really know how everyone is feeling. You know what everyone is posting.
The algorithm.
Right.
I think my show would do well. I think the issue is, look, there's obviously going to be people who don't want to buy Israeli content or support somebody who's Israeli, even though I'm also American. Like, there are always going to be those people. And it happened before October 7th. All the anti-Semitism that's going on, I wasn't surprised in a way. All these people that I was telling them that one of the reasons why I wanted to leave New York is that I felt there was anti-Semitism and I couldn't be the kind of Jew I want to be. And Israelis mostly were just like, what are you talking about? And then this happened. They were like, is this what you're talking about? I'm like, these people existed. All this existed. They just weren't emboldened to say what they really think. So there was something about it that I'm like, now it's out in the open. Like,
so you felt validated.
I felt validated. And I felt like all these fears that I have of the next Holocaust, which I've been walking around with. And my husband, who's Israeli, born and raised in Tel Aviv, he's like 8th generation Israeli, 9th generation Israeli. He didn't get what I was talking about. And now he's like, well, I get it now. And it's weird to say that's validating, but it's kind of like this fear that I was always worried about finally happened.
I noticed in my community that people who are direct descendants of Holocaust survivors, it clicked in for them very quickly. They understood what was happening very quickly. I don't have that in my family, and I was confused for a much longer time. Everyone else was like, oh, we knew this could happen. There's a rubric for this.
Now you get it.
Prior to October 7th, there's the American Jew and the Israeli Jew, and something fused because we saw that Israelis are victims of the most intense anti-Semitism that I've ever heard of outside the Holocaust. And there was now this connection where your husband, multiple generations Israeli, didn't understand what you meant, and now you understand each other.
And people are also like, well, you have an American passport, and my daughter's an American citizen. They're like, what are you doing here? There's like a few answers to that. First one is, I don't want to be an immigrant again. Like, I don't think it's so easy to just pick your family up, move, even though I'm from New York. To move to New York, it's like, I'm in the film industry. I'm in the film and TV industry. I'm just a small fish. Do you know how many people are in the film and TV industry in New York? Like, why would I suddenly just be able to take whatever I have going on here and move it there? Like, that's not going to happen.
But especially now.
Especially now. And then the other thing is that I have my community here. I have my friends here. And I feel safer because I feel like I know what the threat is. And there, I don't know who's out for me. There's the Jewish thing. There's the Israeli thing. There's like that politics. And there's also like, I have friends from New York, and since Corona, really, they were talking about, wow, New York got so dangerous. The crime's everywhere. And it's this crime that wasn't there before. It's suddenly happening now. And I'm like, so where am I supposed to move to? Like New York, where I don't feel safe from anything? Where do you think is better? And especially as an Israeli and as a Jew, I get why people are running away. Also, now that I have kids, it's total kid. And now that I have kid, it's a totally different. I looked at it differently. When everything happened on October 7th, I was just like, if it was just me and my husband, like we would like figure something out. But I was literally like, I have to protect my baby. We have no front door on the building. This is where we were living previously. We didn't have a shelter. We didn't have like a front door in the building. It was just like an open thing. And I told my husband, like, they're coming to Tel Aviv. They're coming here. They're going to come up. Like, we have to do something for the baby. How do I protect her? I'm like, that never crossed my mind before because I never had a kid. And now all of a sudden I'm like, oh, this is what people mean when they talk about being parents.
So I have a few questions. The first one is just for you to share, and you just did a little bit, but what was October 7th like for you?
Well, he usually gets up with the baby in the morning. So I was sleeping. But then we started to get sirens in Tel Aviv, and he like runs in with the baby. He's like, there's a siren. So we ran down, and then we come back up. There's like another siren, and then he like turns on the TV, and we looked at the TV to see what's happening, and he says some terrorists came in. And I go, how many? And he's like, I don't know, it's probably dozens. And I said, it's probably hundreds. I didn't think it was thousands. Like, I couldn't imagine. Like, I knew it was bigger than whatever he thought it was. I guess that was just like an instinct. And then I was like, they're coming to Tel Aviv. And I think that was the plan for some of them, get as far as you can. He was like, they're not coming to Tel Aviv. And I was like, they're coming to Tel Aviv. And I'm like trying to figure out, where am I going to go? Because we didn't even have any shelters in any of the buildings next to us to go to. And I called a friend of mine who lives in a neighborhood nearby, and like she has a room. She was like, you can come to me, but she wasn't around. She's like, if you want, you can go to my mom who lives in Ramat Sharon, which is just like, it's like a drive away, like a 20-minute drive away. And my thought was, like, I know her mom, and her mom likes to feed people, and she really likes to take care of people. And because I was supposed to leave the next week to go to the US, so there was no food in the house. And this is like my Holocaust. I was like, we're going to starve. So I was like, if we go to my friend's mom, she's going to have food. I know it. That was my thought. So I grabbed what I could. I took my jewelry with me. Like, it was like, I didn't know what to take. I thought like I'd be more on top of it, but like, no, you take things, you don't know what you need. And we got in the car, and he's like, we don't have a car seat. I was like, just fucking drive. She was like in a carrier on me. And you drive through, and like there's some people there, but everybody's in it. Nobody knows what's going on. We got to our house, and we stayed there for a few days. And I just like, my husband wasn't on Telegram, but I think he was getting things sent to him that people had seen on Telegram. And then he was like, the soldier, the one who looked like she was raped. And I saw that, and I was just like, and my husband, he goes, they don't know yet. They're not reporting it. And I was like, that's real. Look at what she's wearing. Like, that's real. Like, I question everything coming out of Gaza. Like, I don't know what to believe anything, but I saw that and I was like, that's real. And then it was just like, you can't even imagine what's going on. And I'm looking at my daughter. I'm like, I can't fathom what's actually going on. And then there were just a few days where you're just panicking and I'm trying to take care of my daughter who doesn't understand what's going on. How do I protect her? Like, I need to be her mom right now. Like, I'm not going to now go into Gaza and take people out. I'm not going to the south. I'm right here right now. I'm taking care of her. Like, I need to be her mom. Like, just be with her. And it was hard to do that. So I think it took a few days for me to just be like, you need to stop panicking. You need to stop looking at the news. Like, you'll find out. And that was when I started to just turn off. You can't avoid it so much, When you go to the park, you hear all the moms who are, they're not in touch with their husbands, who they're away and they're like taking care of multiple kids on their own. And like, there was no framework. All the kids were around. And like, you're like, well, thank God I'm not in Gaza. Like, I don't know what I would do if I was there. Like, I know the people there are desperate. At the same time, it's like, I don't know. I'm just like, I care about my own people who are suffering. It's hard for me to know what's going on there and have my heart there when I'm bleeding over here. And then I have all these friends who I felt like were very much left wing. Suddenly we're looking at everything a bit differently. Everything goes through your head, and it still does. Like, even when something good happens today, there's always this aspect of, I'm grateful that I had a good day or I have this good moment. But what about all the people who have hostages, who like their kids are still there and they don't know what's going on with them? That's really who I think about. And I'm like, you can't even enjoy anything these days.
Well, now that we're in a slightly darker place,
Yeah.
I will keep it a little dark and say that sexual violence that is in the show is sexual violence that arises within human relationships.
Yeah.
Which makes it hard to talk about.
Yeah.
But that's the truth. I'm wondering how the sexual violence that took place on October 7th sat with you and continues to sit with you now.
There is a part of me that goes, I can understand what it feels like to have the physical aspect of someone doing something you don't want to your body in this sexual way, to have someone penetrate you in a way that you don't want to be in. Like, I can relate to that feeling. And at the same time, I go, I can't relate to what the people are going through over there. It's not the same. And it makes Chanchi's experience, my own experience, kind of like depicted on TV. And I go, that's nothing. And then at the same time, people obviously also aren't going to want to watch this right now, because you don't need to watch some show that's entertaining and then see an aspect of what's happening right now in your real life. But I think, this was I didn't even share this with my husband, but at the beginning, like closer in October, November, in my head, I was like, we need to have another baby. We need to outnumber everyone. We need more for the team, And it was so difficult to have sex and not think about all these women and girls. And I didn't want my husband to think that I'm associating what we're doing with that kind of violence. So in a way, I kind of struggled through it a few times, just because I didn't want them to, don't let the terrorists win. Do you know what I mean? Like, I didn't want them to have this over me. And eventually I got past it and I was able to separate it. And then I had seen a post, someone posted on Facebook in a women's group. Someone had literally posted, I think it was anonymously, about like, I'm having a hard time having sex with my husband because I'm thinking about everybody who was raped. And a lot of people were like, me too, me too, me too. And some people were like, it's the next ring of terrorism. It's like another way that they affect us. And that kind of sat with me. And I was like, I can't let them affect my life in all these aspects. And also I'd been through something that I had gotten through. Like, when I think about my first sexual experience, like, it took me a long time to have sex with my husband, who we've been together for 7 years, and to not think about whether it's okay or not, like not to have any aspect of guilt involved because I'm not married. even after we were married, sometimes that thought went through my head, or like I held back in a way because there was something about it. Like the act itself is wrong. And Judaism itself doesn't have an issue with sex and sexual pleasure. Like that's not what's in the books. You know what I mean? That's how people have twisted it to control other people.
I'm shooting our executive producer a look here because we did an interview with Hannah Boteach.
Okay.
And she owns a shop in Jerusalem called Kosher Sex.
I heard of it.
She owns this shop. And she talked a lot about her sense of sort of the evolution of sexuality in the wake of October 7th and how to re-sanctify this act when it became, I mean, her perspective is that the rape is about annihilation and sex is about creation. So you'll have to listen to that episode.
I'll listen.
I hear what you're saying. I think it resonates with a lot of people here and around the world. And I'm also wondering, what content do you think about making now?
I want to answer that with 3 things.
Please.
There's content that I want to make because I want to stay in this industry and I need to make money, and you need to think about what will sell and then make it your own. There are projects that I really want to do because I always wanted to do them. And obviously October 7th affects the content because you can't help yourself. Everything just has a new perspective to it. And then the third thing I want to say is I go to a writing group. It's just a fun thing for me. And, I've done a few of these. And the instructor, he was listening to an interview. Somebody was interviewing this guy. It was an Israeli author about how his October 7th affected his writing. And he looked at the guy who asked him the question, like, what's wrong with you? And his thing was like, I still write about the same things that I've always written about. I get up after October 7th, I get up and I sit at my desk and I'm still dealing with the same themes that I'm constantly questioning. So how does it affect me? Like, obviously, it has really affected the themes and the scenarios. But when you think about the core of what it is that I'm writing, I end up writing, people just like do the same thing over and over again, just in different ways. So it kind of, in a way, was something freeing about it when he said that. And I was like, that's right. Like, I'm working on a show that happens at summer camp. And the show is really about community and like what you'll do for your community. Like, how far will you go?
The good and the bad thing.
The good and the bad. Yeah. Which you could say that's what Chanshi is also about. So there was something about it. I'm like, okay, this is just something that I want to know. Like, it doesn't just sit on terms of what happened October 7th and all those things. It's something a bit deeper. It's more like the human issue, a theme of community. And like, that's something I'm working on, but haven't found a home for it yet. I don't know. I'm working on a bunch of things. I'm just hoping someone's going to want to take the project.
If anyone's listening who has money and desire.
I'm working on like 8 different projects right now. Like, each day it's like something else. I'm in this lab for another Israeli series that I want to write.
I'm dying for season 2.
People just need to write into their local libraries. I don't know, your local TV provider. And
that's
is my message.
That we started with is that there's no home for it that's easily accessible to Americans. So it's hard to get first access.
It's hard to get access. People will find illegal ways to watch it, I'm sure, if they're really dedicated. Of course, that doesn't bring me any money. But I think about Squid Games, that Netflix didn't know it would be their most successful show. It's not in English. It's no one famous that anybody in America knows. It's not a format that we're familiar with. And people saw it and it was something different and it exploded. This guy didn't make any royalties. He's like a regular guy like us. Like, now I guess he has like more jobs, but he didn't make money from having a very successful show. That's aside. The thing is, they didn't know, but that was something new. That was something different. I think my show sits in a place where it's something new, something different. And whoever's going to take it is knowing that they're taking a risk. Yeah. On one hand, it's like I have this really successful show, and compared to some of my friends who like wish that they were in my position, I understand that it looks that way. And then for me, I'm like, well, I'm kind of in the same position as you are because I can't get my next project done. I thought like all the doors would open to me.
And I really do think that has a lot to do with the current political climate. And
definitely. I didn't go to Sweden.
Right. You didn't go to Sweden. This thing that you're saying about the writer who was interviewed, and he's sort of saying, why am I obligated to change the focus of my work? The things that I've grappled with are always going to be what I grapple with. I find that another kind of form of liberation, right? You don't have to change your content just because we're in this really extreme situation. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
As a possible way of defying what's been done.
And that's like what I'm constantly telling myself, because I'll get up and I'll sit down to start writing and I'll be like, there are hostages. What are you doing? Like, how can you do anything besides sit in a corner and cry and pray, or like me? Like, what can I do? But then I tell myself, I'm like, these people will come home, I hope. And there needs to be something to come home to.
Life and art and
in Israel, and, you know, hope for the better, because like that's the only thing we can do.
I want to thank you. This has been a really...
Yeah, this is fun. And I feel like, you know, I did something productive.
I'm so glad. And again, I'm really glad that you're spending the time with me. So thank you. And hopefully we'll see more of your work soon.
Yes, stay alive.
Stay alive.
לכבוד השנה החדשה, אני מאחלת לך שתשמח, שתצליח. אתה אומר שלא היית שם כשנולדתי, איך בכלל כועסים על זה? הוא מבקש למצוא אצלי מקום שקט יותר, לעצמי אין לי מקום כזה. אבל אתה נושא אותי כל השנים כמו היית לוויתן ואני יונה. הוא מבקש ולא מוצא מקום לשים אותי לוויתן. אתה צוחק ומספר איך לא אהב אותך אבא שלך, ובזווית אתה בודק אם בלי ששמת לב חמק לך משהו ממנו. אבל אתה נושא אותי כל השנים כמו היית לוויתן ואני יונה. הוא מבקש ולא מוצא מקום לשים אותי לוויתן. אבל אתה נושא אותי כל השנים כמו היית לוויתן ואני יונה. הוא מבקש ולא מוצא מקום לשים אותי לוויתן. לכבוד השנה החדשה, אני מאחלת לך שתשמח, שתצליח.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to What Came After wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us online at whatcameafter.com.